Hi everybody, welcome. I'm Jeremy, I'm the director of the Honors Program. Thank you so much for coming out for our event on this beautiful, nature is cooperating and looking kindly upon us, talking about art and politics on this April night. And so, yeah, Maya sees my romantic side coming out. So I'll just say a few words of welcome and then I'll hand it over to our speakers for the evening. I'm so pleased to see everyone. This is the Art and Politics Lecture Series, which is more or less a monthly lecture series during the school year here at SVA, sponsored by the Honors Program and the Visual and Critical Studies Program. This is our last lecture for the season, but please keep in touch. I'll pass around a sign-up sheet where please just put if you're here, but also you can put if you're not on our list and would like to be, to find out about future events. We have once a month free and open to the public events on the art, politics, our contemporary crises, and the lines between them. So I will pass around the sign-up sheet this way. I'm very pleased that this is our last event of the season because it's an event with a certain personal resonance for me. And so I'm pleased to introduce our two speakers for the evening. I'll start with Arnaldo Lopez, who is the director of the Pregones Theater in the Bronx. Both of our speakers today have PhDs, but as Ben has described it to me, they're sort of the off-ramp from PhDs into art and politics both. So Arnaldo has a PhD in Latin American Literatures and Cultures from New York University. He first joined the Pregones Theater when the company set out to transform a South Bronx warehouse into a performing arts center, and later helped engineer a merger with the historic Puerto Rican Traveling Theater in Manhattan. We're very excited to welcome him here today. Let's give him a round of applause. And then second, I'd like to introduce Ben Fink. I could read the bio, and there's good stuff in the bio, but I will also say that Ben and I have known each other since college, where we did a number of wild and zany experimental political theater projects together. I was recently informed that our theater company, which lasted about a year, performed 7 works, which I did not quite realize how productive we were.
We got that footnote in TDR.
Yes, exactly. We have been footnoted in theater history. But so Ben and I have known each other a long time and have had over the years a large number of discussions about art, politics, and ideas, and as well as collaboration. And it really pleases me. Ben has been at work as a community organizer and a theater practitioner in Lechner County in Kentucky, in the coal fields of Appalachia. And it really pleases me that the book that Ben has edited, Art and Democracy, the plays that they're going to speak tonight about the long-term project that Ben became a part of, Arnaldo became a part of, they're both parts of. It's really exciting to launch this book together, and I strongly encourage, there's a special student discount for students here, so please pick up a copy. I myself am in the midst of reading it and enjoying it immensely, and really it's just an honor to have my dear friend and colleague and comrade here tonight. So let's give a rousing round of applause for our speakers. I'm going to move to this side of the room because my coat's over there. But then I'll hand it over to them. So,
thanks, Jeremy. Greetings, evening, everybody. Really excited to be here. And so this is called a lecture series, but I either am proud or sorry to tell you that we're not actually planning to lecture here this evening. That this is, as Jeremy said, we both have PhDs. We are fully capable of talking at you for 90 minutes. That is something that we very much could do. But there's a reason why we're not doing that. And this is actually very much form follows function, as we're the kind of stuff we're talking about tonight. So we really want this to be a conversation and are going to conduct it in that manner. And rest assured, you'll hear plenty from us and our views about art and politics as it goes. But before we start, we want to start in the way that we often do, which is with a prompt that we are all thinking about together. So would love for you to either meet a new friend or reconnect with an old friend that's sitting near you or far away, and spend a couple of minutes. Number one, introduce yourself if you don't know the person, and then discuss a little bit the following question, which is, what public role do you hope your art could play? Recognizing that the words public and art and perhaps hope are controversial, that could be interpreted variously. So again, take a couple of minutes, talk with an old friend, meet a new friend. What public role do you hope that your art could play? And then we'll chat about it. Go. So let's start continuing this conversation together, but loving that there's so much, and by all means, grab each other's contact info and keep chatting after we go. Water? Yeah. So we're gonna share, but please interrupt us with a question, with et cetera. This is what ideally we'd all be sitting around in a circle, but there's a few too many of us. So that's the and if you don't interrupt fast enough, Adam will. So Adam and I've known each other since we were 5, and made theater together for a long time too. So this is it's great because I've spent most of my life living in far off places where I don't know anybody. It's Kentucky and Minnesota and Germany. So this feels like a kind of family homecoming. But anyway, love to hear from a few folks. Was there a story you heard that struck with you, or a story you shared that struck you? Please.
So,
what's your name?
Daniel.
Daniel.
The story I'm working on, the main thing that I kind of want to go into with it is explore the human consciousness and the inhibitions of humanity that drive us towards a downward spiral.
The human consciousness and the inhibitions of humanity that drive us toward a spiral. A downward spiral. Got it.
It's only going down.
Huh. So that's the role you want your art to play in the world. What are the inhibitions that drive us in that downward spiral?
Yeah, I think it's important to discuss those.
I love it. Other folks, what'd you share? What'd you hear? Please, your name is?
My name's Kate.
Hey, Kate.
Lisa, if you don't mind, I'm sure. Lisa kept telling me that she wasn't an artist.
Right.
And I'm a playwright, so I asked her why she goes to theater. She said she goes to a theater. And she said she had such an interesting response, but the gist of it was, I like to learn how I fit.
Huh.
And I thought, okay, that's it. I don't hear anything. It's just such a, you drill down to that. But it's such a great, why do we go to theater? To learn how we fit. I love that.
Let's just meditate a moment on this dialectic, right? But so what drives our the inhibitions in our consciousness that take us in a downward spiral, and how do we fit? This is amazing. Please.
Well, I'm in between jobs and I'm sort of this spiral that's not upward in particular. Anyway, not to make this all about.
Please. No.
No, it's just very interesting. Thank you for this.
Absolutely. Let's hear a couple more. Yeah, Greg.
My conversation partner expressed a desire to make art that makes people think, but wondering whether or not people want to think or whether or not they just want to be entertained.
Want to make people think, but do people want to think, or do they just want to be entertained? And to what extent are those things mutually exclusive? Yeah. Please. Your name is?
My name is
Victoria.
My conversation partner, Sheila, wants to make art that has people less littering and stop voting for maniacs.
Yes.
Got it. Less littering, stop voting for maniacs. I'm going to refrain from asking what defines a maniac, but maybe that'll come up in the conversation.
4 minutes.
Jeremy.
My partner, Cecil, was talking about how the part of the hope of art would be that people who liked her art would be able to find one another and bond with each other over her art that they appreciated, so it would help build ties between people in all means.
Oh, I love that. I'm imagining all of these in a kind of constellation that I'm not going to try to write all on a whiteboard, but the ways they connect with one another and where they contradict. This is this is wonderful foundation for what we're going to talk about tonight. Yeah, please, Josh.
We were all actually talking about the act of creating art as sort of like a radicalizing action, or sort of like a way of like empowering people, just like creating visual art, creating music.
Mm-hmm. As a radicalizing act, empowering people to think things that they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, or figure out how to take action, or build
Mm-hmm.
activism into their lives.
Got it. How do you take action? How do you build activism into your life? This is awesome. So, from everything you've heard and everything in plenary and stuff you haven't heard yet, hold this. We're going to now do a little bit of exposition. Arnaldo's going to answer this question for himself in a little bit longer form, and then I'll do the same. And in the process, a little bit of basic exposition of like, what the hell is this book, and who the hell is Roadside Theater, and stuff like that. And then as you're listening to us, like, how does this connect with the ways that you answered this question? How does this connect with what you've heard? Because if you don't jump in, we'll throw it back at you after that. Please.
Thank you for all the answers. I think that this idea of the constellation and the complexity and the range of things that occupy not just your mind but your hope as you move forward in making art, supporting art, making art part of your life. To me, that's all super resonant. In my case, there's a number of factors that I think shaped my route. One being Puerto Rican. I was born in Puerto Rico. I was raised in Puerto Rico up until my teens. And I became initially politicized in realizing that Puerto Rico is not a state and was missing a bunch of key rights that I understood were part of life in the United States, but that as a Commonwealth, which is a euphemism, our colony did not have. I went to school away from Puerto Rico. I went to Pennsylvania. This was the 80s. It was Reagan years. And I started to learn about the ways in which people who have moved into the United States as migrants or immigrants usually end up in a box, right? There's identities that are assigned to us. At that time, as a young person in college, it was hard to grapple with that. I think that politicized me a little further. And the thing that inspired me the most was graphic art. I was lucky enough to know that there was a tradition of graphic art that was for social justice coming out of in my culture in Puerto Rico, and that experience and that mode of expression was luckily everywhere, even though you have to sort of look for it because it gets lost in the sort of mainstreaming of lanes through which you can develop as a young person. So I think at that point I was really interested in the kinds of work that articulated a hope for something different from what we think we are set up to have. The goals and dreams that are passed down in some generic way, which may or not be reinforced by your family experience, but are still out there in the culture, right? And specifically in the United States. So out of that came a desire to think of a place where creativity was really a contribution to being more awake. I know that now we talk about being woke and that it has become its own language, but really the desire to be able to see through some of these things. In time, I was lucky enough to find myself in New York City, from Pennsylvania, formative years, coming here and sort of reconnecting with other people from the Caribbean, other people from other parts of the world, a place that was more diverse, and ended up in the knowledge of what's the work that animates the communities that I saw myself reflected in. And that's how I came to Pregones Theater, a theater that was founded by Puerto Rican artists, that was really looking to work at the in location with working communities, and that still strived for artistry creative expression at its fullest, the capacity to make a living, and the goal to make an impact. I like to think of our theater as generative in two ways. Of course, the repertory. We have an ensemble of artists that creates musical works that often allude to history and allude to culture, allude to race, allude to class. And then sometimes they do it as a community. Sometimes they do it in connection across culture with other communities, as the work that we did with Roadside Theater now for over 30 years. And the other way that I like to think of our company is that the theater itself, which is a nonprofit that has a theater, physical theater in the South Bronx, where the company had been rooted for a long time and was sort of trying to turn around the bad reputation of the Bronx and tell people this is a real community. This isn't just what you read in the headlines. This isn't what circulates around the globe as some kind of specter of the worst possible. But really create that space as a work of art. Like, what is it like to create an organization as a work of art? Leave it at that.
Love that. So again, thinking about the ways this resonates with the stories you've heard, I'm going to share a little bit and then want to open it up, and we'll go from there. Just like thinking about the number of ways I could start this story, but what you just said actually really resonates. So I grew up kind of on the other side, right? So I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut, first ring suburb, down the street from Adam, and was, parents had master's degrees both, and the immigrant story was there, but it's a few generations back. Grandma was a Kindertransport child, got out of Nazi Germany in 1939, never saw her parents again, but we didn't really talk about it. We were, to use language that was 0% a part of my childhood, we were participating in the project of whiteness, right? We were going to achieve, and we were and going to make it and make our careers and all this. And I've never, the way I've explained it to people in the years since coming into this work, and I'll tell you that part of the story in a minute or three, is I grew up without any sort of material wants, but I grew up with a great deal of community want, that I really grew up feeling very isolated and lonely. And it wasn't until many, many years later, when I got into doing this work, that I realized, oh right, this is a part of segregation, right? This is a part of these same dominating forces that led to some of the stuff that Arnaldo was talking about from a different perspective. And it hit home for me many years later. It's like 2017, 2018. I was back in Connecticut attending a performance of a chamber choir that I used to sing in. This is how Jeremy and I first met. We're both as choir geeks. And I was just sitting with the person next to me, and we were just making small talk before Bach's St. Matthew Passion began, like you do. And he just asked me, where do you live? And I said to him, which was true at the time, I said, well, I live in East Kentucky. I live in the coal fields of Appalachia. And he just kind of stops talking, and he looks at me and says, I'm sorry. And I said, I'm not. Because the reason I went there, and the reason I went there was to work with Roadside Theater. And I went there in 2015. And I think my parents at the time, they were very, very lovely and supportive, always. They talked about it like I was going to the Peace Corps. I think they used those words. And it really made me mad at the time, but I didn't know why it was making me so mad. And it was only years later that I kind of figured out how to articulate it to myself, which is they imagined that I was going to go there and give something to these poor people who were so needy and helpless and etc. And what was actually true is I was going there because I needed something. I was going there out of this hunger for something that I couldn't fully articulate at the time, but now what I realize is for this, I'm thinking about talking about connection, I'm thinking about talking about where do I fit, that it's like, where are the people that I actually, that I actually connect with, that sort of see me in a way that I want to be seen and include me in the way I want to be included, because it sure as hell wasn't in academia, where I spent a long time and felt very alone. It sure as hell wasn't in this kind of social justice, activist theater that was, I'll sometimes call it para-academia, which is to say, not in institutions of higher ed, but very close by, and sharing a lot of that language, sharing a lot of those assumptions, and sharing, frankly, a lot of those people, where I felt there was a lot of what I could only describe as sadomasochism going on, right? Which we've all experienced in various ways, right? It's either I'm going to whip you for being bad, or I'm going to whip myself for being bad. And what was remarkable, so I to sort of put a narrative close on the story, I was working in South Jersey, long story there that I won't tell right now, and Roadside Theater, Appalachian grassroots theater company from the coal fields of East Kentucky and Southwest Virginia, was up here at the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater on 47th Street, doing an off-Broadway play with Pregones. And this is 2015, and we got connected through an old civil rights organizer in Minnesota who we both knew. And I ended up working on this play, doing research, bringing my people from South Jersey to it, and they said, you want to move to East Kentucky? And I said, yeah, why not? Because what I felt when I was around them was this kind of affirmation that I had not felt anywhere else. That, we are working on some of the most difficult issues of class and race and exploitation and oppression and all this, but we're doing it in a way where everybody actually is welcome. That, my life doesn't matter more because I'm a privileged white person, but it also doesn't matter less. And that we can actually all laugh and share together in a way that is not like, I think we have. I'm just thinking about, again, some of the stuff that we were hearing. It's like you're either doing art that educates, that is like dealing with the hard stuff and taking it on, or you're doing art that is funny and makes you feel good and has singing and dancing and all that stuff in it. And I think the tradition that Roadside and Pregones both come out of, along with a whole bunch of allied theater companies from other cultural traditions that we could talk about that have a decades-long history of working together, they're all coming out of this tradition that I think has been lost to a lot of people. It certainly wasn't something that I grew up with, either in West Hartford, Connecticut, or in academia, or in para-academia, which is, we can actually do both of those things. Like, we can make theater that is all the more serious for being funny and entertaining. We can make theater that is all the more deep by being affirming. And that's something that I didn't have access to before that. And that's the art that I hope to make. And the other thing, and in a second I'll hush, as say in the coal fields, and first ask you, Arnaldo, if the stuff you want to respond to, and then we can have a more open conversation. Is those of us roughly under the age of 50, I think, have always lived in a world where it feels like it is absolutely impossible to make a life and a living for ourselves as what you might call a community-based artist, right? As somebody who is of a community and wanting to make art that comes out of those traditions with and for people in that community, right? That's something that if you're looking to do that, you're going to starve. That wasn't always the case. And that's part of what the story of Art in a Democracy is. So Art in a Democracy is a collection of 9 plays and 10 essays coming out of the collective work that Roadside Theater, Pregones Theater, and a bunch of other theater companies, most notably Junebug Productions, Black Civil Rights Theater company coming out of SNCC, did together and independently over several decades. And a lot of people don't even know that history exists, right? Again, I sure as hell didn't. Let alone did I understand all of the things that come out of that legacy that actually makes possible a lot of things that are impossible, or that people think are impossible. And I can say lots more detail about that in a second. But first, I'm curious, what resonates, what you'd add?
A lot of it resonates, but I want to lift something about the experience of coming to know these theater makers and seeing that they were really interested in finding ways to create work that was nourished by knowing communities that have found ways of staying true to themselves, ways of staying politically active, ways of staying culturally honest, and to be nourished by that, and then find a way to give back, so that there's a relational aspect to it, where in some ways we feel like I could tell that these artists were married to a sense of community without essentializing what that was. It was just about making sure that the right people were there, making sure that you had the ear to harvest stories and to lift them and to expand them and to make sure that they were true. And I think that that's what seduced me. That was a major aspect in making me think, wow, this is real life. And how exciting that these folks are looking to make this viable. And I think that there's room for me to do that, along with them. And when I met the folks from Roadside and the folks from Junebug during a performance, after which there was a story circle in which the artist invited members of the audience to share a little bit of what it was like, where our minds went when we were attending the performance, anything that was sort of fueled by that experience, and it was in many ways a kind of discovery, right? Like knowing that there's an entire network at the national level that I didn't really find elsewhere, that I didn't really, I may have heard the names here and there, but I didn't have a sense of how this actually operated as a living thing. So many places we could go elaborating on that, talking more about what is a story circle, what happened to that network, why does it not exist anymore, what are the legacies of it. But I want to actually hold here and put it to you all is what reactions, what questions, what challenges, how do you have to what you've just heard, including, and I want to offer, and this is something Arnaldo says so beautifully about being in the South Bronx, and when we're up there, we did a similar thing up there a couple weeks ago, is like, this is a place, we hope, where you can ask the questions that you're a little nervous to ask. Like, if somebody says, this is all a whole bunch of bullshit, like, you're welcome, like, please say, because whatever you're thinking, other people in the room are thinking too, and Arnaldo and I got a pretty thick skin, and so we welcome the yeah buts, the what ifs, the how abouts. Yeah, please, Lynn.
I'd just like to hear you give a little bit of explanation about ensemble theater itself and how it's different from the conventional theater. I think people enjoy it.
Totally.
In that basis.
Our ensemble practice, so let me backtrack to say, I'm the managing director of a company. I work with 3 artistic directors, an artistic director and 2 associate artistic directors. So in itself, that sort of leadership team is a team. This isn't a hierarchical one person at the helm, the captain of the boat. It's really already a micro community. And ensemble practice comes out of collective theater making. In the case of our company, it is a large circle of actors, musicians. We are a musical theater company. Directors, writers, and designers. To that, over the years, we've added a circle of technical production professionals. And what makes Work a Pregones PRTT different from a standard producing company is that we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to voice and contribute towards what's being built. And that is not a free-for-all sort of situation. There is methodology, there's a time and there's a sequence that has developed over time. And this is a lesson that I like to always say, which is we're not about consensus, we're about consent. So we want to make sure that everybody is in agreement about the direction in which we're moving. But it's certainly about making room for very wildly different talents and wildly different ways of coming at the work. In the end, the work, the ensemble work is also about making sure that those artists that will be performing have an opportunity to be on stage and show off. So there's the artistry part, and then there's the storytelling part, and both are loyal to sort of a sense of collective and community.
So a thing that I've sort of observed over the years is that I am a theater nerd going way back, but a lot of my closest collaborators are not theater people. They're visual artists, they're musicians, they're designers, they're work in all sorts of different media. And yet a lot of the same principles resonate, right? So Roadside Theater itself was founded as part of a multimedia cultural organization called Appalshop, short for the Appalachian Media Workshop, that still exists, and it is the idea of how can a people, specifically the Appalachian people, the residents of the coal fields, make meaning in their own way of, by, and for themselves, given particular resonance and importance by the number of people that have tried to tell their story for them, right? All of the hillbilly stereotypes over the past 100+ years that have been used as a pretext to come in and take the labor, take the land, take the resource, etc. Because of course, if you're a whole bunch of dumb, drunk ignoramuses who vote for maniacs, why should we care what you think? And so the idea, and I'm not gonna say that those stereotypes are entirely untrue, and we can talk about that, because I came as, I would routinely introduce myself in the coal fields as a communist Jew from the Northeast. Technically not true, because where's there a communist party worth joining these days? But the fact is, I was somebody way to the left of the average voter in a county that went 80% for Trump in 2016. And we can talk about that. And yet it is still true that I found so much resonance with people there. And so anyway, not to say that all those stereotypes are untrue. And yet, there is so much more context, right? And frankly, a lot of the maniacal tendencies, I would argue, come from the sense of nobody listens to us, nobody is taking us seriously, people are just coming in, to quote a longtime colleague who's worked with Roadside for a long time, I have the idea that, okay, well, the hillbillies are just, they say they don't trust the media, right? Well, I grew up in a journalist family. Of course, the media is, don't brush off the media. But this person says to me, it's like, why should we trust the media? They've been telling lies about us for the last century. It's like, yeah, there's some resonance there. So anyway, point being, this is the project of Appalshop, and it went across media. And Likewise, a lot of the people that have read Art and Democracy and told me about it, they're not theater people, but they find lessons in it. And specifically this question, coming back to your question, Lynn, about ensemble, this is part of it. That one of the lessons that I learned at Roadside is that all theater is community theater. And the stuff that we don't think about as community theater, we call gated community theater. And I think that is a lesson that can be expanded beyond theater to all sorts of different art forms, that all art is community art. The question is, what community or communities is it of, by, and for? And to what extent are those communities gated? Because one thing that Roadside often talks about is we make theater of, by, and for poor, working class, and middle class people who are the majority in every community except a gated community. And I say this with full knowledge of myself as somebody who comes from a professional class background, right? And I'm not, one thing that is again distinctive about the work is, I open my mouth, I'm not a hillbilly, I call myself a communist Jew from the Northeast, and yet, for my own reasons, and I share my own stories in the context of other people sharing theirs, what I am hungry for in my life is art that is accountable not to a funder, not to an academic, but to my neighbors, and to my neighbors across the street, and to my neighbors across the country. And that probably sounds a little bit like holier than thou when I say it, and I own that, and I don't mean it to. Which is to say, if I were to sort of go down the path of the individualist, gated community artist or academic or whatever, I know where that leads because I grew up that way, and it would make me really, really lonely. And the process of making theater and making art in the context of an ensemble, what that is it's a microcosm of a community. Right? It's a community within a community. And it is a community that's explicitly accountable to the people outside of it. So when Roadside makes theater, Roadside toured across the country, but we never made theater. I'm not an ensemble member anymore. I was started working with the ensemble 2015, became an ensemble member 2017, worked with them until 2020. We always did the theater at home first. The first audience and the primary audience was our neighbors. And if we did not have something to offer to our neighbors that resonated with them as not only fundamentally true and accurate, but also made them see things about themselves that they didn't recognize and see themselves in a different way and their potential for action in the world in a different way, then that was not a play that we would take on tour. Right? That was not a play we would take to communities across the country and say, we are, a theater company of, by, and for the Appalachian coalfields and the people that live there. And that kind of accountability is, I think, one of the things that makes ensemble theater and ensemble produced art really distinctive. It's a question that I will often, most of my life these days is not making theater, right? I'm a community organizer, I'm a consultant. I work with different organizations that want to have closer relationships with their communities but don't know how. And I bring a lot of the lessons that we learned and that we tried to explain in these books to that process. And one of them is, okay, who are you accountable to, actually? At the end of the day, Community Service Agency in the Naugatuck Valley of Connecticut, which is one of the places I consult right now, are you accountable to your funders before you're accountable to your neighbors, or vice versa? Right? You got to be accountable to both if you're going to stay in business. But when there's a conflict, to quote Florence Reese of Harlan County, Kentucky, which side are you on? Who are you accountable to at the end of the day? And that is, I think, the thing that connected Roadside, Pregones, Junebug Productions, all of our different allies in places that on their surface look nothing alike. Rural, urban, black, white, Latino, etc., north, south. That fundamental sense of before anything else, we're accountable to our neighbors, right? We will sell out our funders before we sell out our neighbors. We will sell out our fellow artists before we sell out our neighbors. We will sell out our critics before we sell out our neighbors. That is a thing that we all share. Other questions, reactions, thoughts, provocations? What's on your minds? Please.
Who is the audience for Pregones?
The audience for Pregones is everybody. We make theater that is intended to be for a general audience, but we'll pay extra attention to historically underrepresented people in New York City, specifically to Latinx people with whom we share a big chunk of cultural formation. So language, music, other coordinates in common. But it's really intended to be presented in a way that anybody can come and feel like there's an honest overture for them to be engaged.
Is it in Spanish?
It is not in Spanish always, but sometimes it's in Spanish, sometimes it's in English, often it's in Spanish and English, and sometimes it's intentionally in Spanglish.
Let me add something briefly, and then I saw two hands, because I love this question, and it speaks to one of the kind of categories of analysis that I learned at Roadside that does not exist in the world I knew it beforehand, and that is the notion of a community's own center of power. An organization that is of, by, for, and accountable to some community or another, however defined, right? So it could be the people of Hemphill, Kentucky, or it could be underrepresented people in New York City, or it could be however you define it. Please.
Let me step one step back.
Do it.
To say, so there's this idea of an ensemble theater that's explicitly that's explicit about its community orientation. And there's also this idea of a theater that is popular. So I'm interested, and this is something that Dudley Koch at Roadside sort of has used frequently and on purpose to call attention to the fact that the work that we do is really intended to be an overture and reflect the audience for whom it's presented, but also be open for anybody to enter it. A commercial theater is explicit about its industry orientation, and it seeks profit. So it's two very different propositions. We don't have to eliminate one. Actually, we already, in some intricate and complex ways, depend on these things to coexist. That is a product of the flows of capital. But I think it's an important thing to say. For folks who are devoted to a kind of popular theater, the move towards the orientation of community center of power is a coherent one.
Mm-hmm. And specifically, and this is one of the things that's distinctive about a community center of power, is it is at the same time explicitly of, by, and for a specific community, and at the same time you can walk in from any identity, any community, any background, and in a weird way that you can't fully explain, you feel at home there. You feel at rest there. You feel that you can express yourself there in a different way. And these exist all over the place in different forms. They exist often, but not always. Actually, no, I'm not even going to say often, but not always. Depending on the community, depending on the context. For instance, a church can be a community center of power, right? Can be certainly lots of history of this in all sorts of ethnic traditions. And a church can also be the most exclusive, cliquey, gated community in the world, right? An arts center, a theater company can be a community center of power, or it can be the exact opposite. It can be a place with walls and hierarchies and designations, and same thing with. I'm just thinking, you know when you walk into a business that is of, by, and for a community versus a business that is not, whose fundamental accountability is to a stockholder. Which is not to say that a business that is a community center of power is not trying to make money, but that it's a different structure of accountability. And I wanted to put that out there as a unit of analysis, because it is one of the things that, again, I never learned in school, but I wish I had learned a lot earlier, is if you want to work with a community, could be a community you see yourself as a part of, could be a community that you would never ever see yourself as a part of, find its centers of power. They're there. They're usually not the organization that you first get pointed to. They're not the organization that gets the most funding by the big national foundations or gets written about by the academics or the mainstream media, but they're there. And when you find them, they're going to welcome you in, regardless of where you are coming from. And we can both tell lots of stories about that, but I just want to put that out there. Please, I'm sorry, kept you waiting for a while.
Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Give me a second to recollect.
No worries.
So what type of audience was the Pergamus for? Well, I went 2 Fridays ago, and I was very pleasantly surprised. It was good. It's good. It was entertaining, and yet it managed to get across a feeling of that it was more than just an entertainment. You could feel kind of a vibe between, somebody said, the 2 poorest communities in the United States, the South Bronx and East Kentucky. And it came across pretty well, I have to say. And I didn't go in thinking that I would enjoy it. It wasn't my bailiwick at all. So it worked pretty well.
If I can put you on the spot and no wrong answer, what did you enjoy about it?
Well, what didn't I enjoy about it? Well, I can tell you what I enjoyed. The performances were good. The music was good. Some of the poetry was powerful and good. The theater, the building itself, it's a very nice space. Really felt good. And there was a good spirit in the audience, I thought. That I can't really talk about so much, because I didn't talk to that many people.
Thank you.
Enough.
Thank you for that. I think in many ways we think of ourselves, the business that we're in is hospitality. We're theater makers who are in the business of hospitality. And that hospitality is down home and of the Bronx, and that's the spirit with which we animate our space in Manhattan. And that's just one way of pointing towards, we always hear about support small business, support independent enterprise, and we are part of a greater network of small and independently run projects that run in many ways counter to the logic of capital. But we live in capital, and we're part of it, and we make significant contributions. So I do encourage everybody to think of what they think they know about nonprofits, and to understand how much power moves around in those circuits.
Keeping up a community center of power is no easy task under neoliberal capitalism. We can talk about that more in a second. The thing I wanted to add to that is Dudley Koch, one of the founders of Roadside, one of the other editors of the books, he was getting interviewed some years ago, I think it was by American Theater Magazine, and the writer asked him, what is Roadside's place in the history of American protest theater? And he said, Roadside is not a theater of protest, it is a theater of affirmation. That fundamentally what we are doing is affirming. And I was half joking to Jeremy last night that it's an understanding of affirmative culture that's a little bit different from what the Frankfurt School was talking about when they were talking about affirmative culture, which is essentially look at the great trophies of Western civilization and the ways in which we have, progressed beyond the, whoever. That this is, it's affirming to you, whoever you are coming into that space. That before we get it, I love that, in addition to professional plays done by professional actors that toured the country, Roadside also did a lot of plays with a specific community, with amateur actors from the community on stage. And one of these plays they did, it was with the residents of a domestic violence shelter, right? So women who had experienced various kinds of awful relationship violence, and this play in various ways tells these stories in their own voices, individual, composite, etc. But the play starts with a murder ballad, with Ron Short, who you saw at Dragonis, singing the song "Pretty Polly" and telling the tale of a man trying to lure a woman to her death in the way the woman outsmarts him. And the point of that is not to trivialize the stories that are going to come after it, but quite the opposite. Is number one, it welcomes people in, because if you just say, come and hear lots of really terrible stories about awful things that have happened to people, most people aren't going to necessarily want to do that. I wouldn't want to do that necessarily. But also, it lets you listen to those stories in a way that's actually deeper, and engage with those stories in a way that's actually deeper, because first you've been singing and hearing jokes. Right? And this is the same, when Roadside did a production with Junebug Productions talking about 400 years of racism and race-based exploitation in America. Start by singing gospel songs and trading jokes back and forth and laughing about the stereotypes of hillbillies and black folks. And so first you affirm. First, you hold up the mirror to a community and say, look at the wealth, look at the riches, look at the beauty that we all have together. And then from there, from that place of affirmation and abundance, we can actually get deep into doing and into looking at all the stuff that is so wrong and so hard, and that we need to act together on. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the point is that people leave the theater, as you all were talking about, recognizing potential for action that you didn't have going in. And you don't do that without recognizing the ground that you stand on and where you can go from there. Jeremy, you had something?
Oh, yeah. I forget exactly what the context was for this, but I noticed the book is blurred by Robert Putnam.
Yes.
My students have, or some of them have heard me talk about Going Alone, and, Putnam's general thesis is that we've been living through this period of intense disconnection, dislocation in American life, that just people, the shtick that some people have heard me talk about before is, just as many people bowl now as bowled 50 years ago, but 50 years ago people bowled in leagues, and now they just go with, maybe random friends. But there's no long-term connection between the people who undertake these activities. And in Putnam's book, some of the things he theorizes or talks a lot about as to why and what is made disconnection so intense in American life is, two of the things he points to are one, longer commutes that people spend, an hour, many people in a car alone each day, maybe each way to work. And two is the rise of television and the fact that culture is largely consumed individually and separately, and that's kind of a new phenomenon in world history in a sense. So I guess just that's a big picture sociological analysis of what's been happening, and those are very powerful forces, urban design in cars and television and the way, just maybe largely any of us, when we get into a conversation, maybe the first thing we talk about is what TV shows we're watching.
Right.
And
Right.
so I just wonder, like, the kind of work you're talking about, how does it almost like, what do you do about those grand, big social processes that are creating the kind of disconnection that you're trying to intervene into?
Huh. Before we say anything, I'm curious if other people have immediate reactions to that question or the stuff that got raised. Let's get a little bit more into the air, but I love big picture. This is wonderful. Isa.
So one thing that Ben and I talk about a lot, I am Ben's partner, so I'm not as I should disclose. But that there are these grand social shifts that have happened, and then what are some of the more concrete economic underlying factors of those social shifts? And one of them would be, one of the specific ones that I would like to learn more about is the defunding of the NEA, the defunding of the National Endowment for the Arts. And so much of Roadside's work, which was done in community by community through telling stories, was directly funded by the NEA and was done so, especially their touring work around the country, where they were allowed to export and share these stories about who Appalachian folks really were. And also their work, with Tregones, with Junebug, all this intercultural work as well. So much of that, specifically, there were folks who, are the groups of neoliberals, the people that really are kind of behind the scenes of creating a lot of the economic structures that we have now, knew how powerful that was to have working class people working together, working across their differences, and knew how dangerous that was to the overarching capitalist system. And so this is a story that's told in the book. It's also it's told in a few different essays by A.D. Spelman, who used to be the head of one of the main branches of the NEA following the Civil Rights Movement. But Reagan, and then following him, Clinton as well, there were all of these cuts made to the NEA. So you could not, demolish it all at once, but what they call like death by 1,000 cuts. And we're at the point now where such a tiny fraction of artists, of full-time working artists, come from working class backgrounds that it's such a pitifully small number.
Yeah.
And this is one of these, we often think about, this is something we often talk about, that we think about neoliberalism as this kind of nebulous cloud that we're all living under, that kind of just exists weirdly and strangely and just is in the air, rather than it being a very specific set of economic rules that have people that who are benefiting from them, specifically benefiting from the individualization and the non-communal work that we're doing together. And so one of the things that you guys were talking about, what is ensemble work, what makes it different from these different things, is that you read, and especially one of the stories early on in Roadside is there's one of the earlier plays it's a murder mystery about coal miners that were hanged. And if I'm making sure it's
They weren't minors, but anyway,
it was a labor story. It's a labor story that ended with the exploitation of the laborers. That was told by telling stories around the community. It was found, They were able to find the evidence by telling stories, and so the actual play itself evolved because you would be up there. The crew would be up on the stage telling the story, and then somebody, the audience, will say, "Oh wait, that's not how it happened."
Right.
Because that was
literally just interrupted the play. Say, it wasn't like that.
Standing up in the middle, because it
and
was,
we encourage this.
because it was done in a tradition of Southern storytelling, where you're sitting around the fireside and people are interrupting each other all the time. or like how we do in the Jewish tradition. It's not seen as impolite necessarily to interrupt somebody, but like you're involved in like in the thing at that given moment.
Right.
So I feel like that's something that's what's on my mind when I'm thinking about like what is it that what we're talking about where we are now as opposed to if we lived 50 years earlier. And so the question, I guess, is obviously where do we go from here?
Yeah. Arnaldo, please.
No, what the hell was better 50 years ago? I mean, what was different? I mean, I'm a little bit over 50.
Sure.
So, it didn't seem so fine. And, if you go back and look over things, there's been, it seems like, I'll just stop. 50 years ago wasn't a bed of roses.
So let me. You want to go first, or want me to go first?
Let me point a few things that I think are useful.
Sure.
I agree 100%. It wasn't better 50 years ago, but there's work that was being done 50 years ago that has been intentionally cut down, so that the cumulative strengths.
Why aren't you happy that the NEA got defunded? Then you're not under the thumb of some goddamn government official who tells you can't take a crucifix and stick it in a glass of urine. I mean, I understand that in Europe there is a lot of funding of arts, but you're always under somebody's thumb.
Better that than corporations.
Is it? I'm not so damn sure.
I think the thing about government, at least in this country, traditionally or mythologically or however you want to frame it, it can be different people, and that the government is supposed to be beholden to all of the people. And at one time, that meant there were certain checks and balances put in place in order to make sure that you were not putting art, or really what it is taking away the funding for art that was, beholden to specific political ideologies. Or you had to say, oh, I'm going to take this cross and put it in urine, and then I'm going to elevate this other depiction of our Lord, if it is your Lord, but that they both were entitled to funding. When it's the government, there was a time where the government's whole facade, or at least mission, was that it represented all of its people, which is what the NEA would do. There were a number of people, and it's interesting because corporations get to do this without any sort of challenge in any forum, really. There were people who decided that there were people whose stories didn't get to get told, or shouldn't be told, for whatever reason. Because, it's a cross and a bit of urine, or it's a black man holding a white woman's hand. So it becomes this kind of thing where personal biases or personal convictions, whether they're noble or not, become the arbiters of what stories get to be told. And the government, in theory, now this is not always true, and I should emphasize
you're good.
I'm not saying
we
that
gotcha.
This is the truth. But the government's facade is that it doesn't have that kind of bias. We know that to be false, but at least under the NEA, projects were given money and given platforms and given voice and given forums that a corporation wouldn't be okay with because of the dollar implications, or that, the other. That's the thing that changes. So you do great musicals in American Airlines Theater, eventually American Airlines Theater gets to say what kind of play is going on in there.
Want to make room before we get too much into back and forth. This is great. No. This is the other folks, other perspectives, other thoughts, other questions. Then we'll hold off for a moment. Then we'll jump in because these are really pregnant issues that are deeply connected. Love to hear from anybody we haven't heard from yet. I saw a lot of nods. Different. Please.
I have a sort of different angle.
Please.
In response to Jeremy's question, which is that I think that theater as a medium is definitely an experience that we sort of lack in the modern day. What I mean is that it's inherently a collective experience. You go here to experience similar emotions, and that sort of collective emotional experience that is like unalienated, like on TV or individually, like consuming media is something that I think we lack and that people are craving. So I really like that idea of like, specifically in relation to theater and community. Uplifted in that way. I really like the push in leftism to sort of like engage with communities in a way that's interpersonal and unalienated. And I feel like it's also.
Is that happening in leftism now? Because that'd be really exciting.
I hope so.
Yes.
Younger population.
Cool. Please.
Yes.
I'm almost 40. I don't think I'm young anymore. So please.
There's a lot of, well, at least there's conversations.
Yeah.
But it does, but I think my mom is Turkish, and so I'm kind of like a two cultural
Yeah.
perspectives about this. But I think like not to make a sweeping generalization.
You're fine.
Sure, but like in Turkey, there's definitely a sense of like community collectivism that we kind of lack in the U.S. somehow, and I think that's really like powerful. And my mother was telling me earlier that like loneliness is not really an emotion that you feel in Turkey, which is really interesting.
Huh.
Really true. Like as opposed to here, where like everyone just feels isolated.
Yeah.
It's because of cultural systems currently. So I like that like theater as a way to break out this.
Yeah.
I'm always too quiet.
That's great.
Wow.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna. Please. Yeah.
I just want to somewhat promote and also this event about singing solidarity, upcoming cabaret, which is so awesome. Talk about them just to volunteer for it, but it's I feel like it's related because we're thinking about how to promote it, and nowadays because there's so little, it's hard to spread the word because we're not even thinking about putting up flyers because people don't even communicate. We don't look at posters anymore. We just share things through word of mouth. So there's such a lack of sharing of information in some way.
I'm gonna, it's.
I hope they get to talk about it because it's such a cool thing on May 7th, and it's very much what you're talking about.
The experience of live arts is unique, right? You are in a room with other people. You have live performers. So whether it's a concert or a theater performance or some intervention that happens in Union Square, it's going to be unlike what's mediated. There's no absolute value saying that the mediated experience is less. That is a bias that some people have, either by age or by education or a mix of those things. But I think when you look at big social shifts, to me it's always useful to be reminded that when we interpret them and when we assign the absolute value to them, that we also hold on to that complexity, because social shifts are the outcome of tremendous movement of all kinds of energy and capital. So that complexity is important because it's generative. So yes, the commute generated a kind of awareness of loneliness. It also gave way to the podcast.
Right, I was thinking that.
And then within the podcast, the podcast generated more podcasts, so that there's now, different kinds of ways in which people narrate their voice. One of the most amazing things about podcasts is if you go to a Streamline, outlet, one of the things that fascinates me is the level of production. Like sometimes it's super polished and you hear everything clearly. Sometimes you have to crank it all the way the volume because the person is just like timidly. But the complexity of what's there to me is really important. Awareness of that generative factor, and the work I do oftentimes is about wayfinding. In that glut of opportunity, in that glut of entertainment, which is also a glut of information. If I can generate the word of mouth, if I can if I can endorse, if I can suggest, and if my audiences do that, that wayfinding work is community building work. And it changes. It's really a way of I'm back at independent culture and small business, because we are inviting people to consciously take on their consumer identity and and put it to a use that we can agree on, that we all have room in it. And yes, major coordinates of public discourse, like the conversation about racial reckoning, and what is the history of Afro-descendant peoples in the United States and elsewhere, and how do we make good for that, right? Do I want to get that information from Hollywood? Do I want to dig a little deeper and go to other platforms? Do I go to New Village Press, or do I worry with do I stay with Harper and Penguin? And what's the relationship? So I mean, I think those are worth noting.
Yeah. Let me share. I think this is wonderful, and I am mindful of the time, so I'll share a few things few that may be useful in continuing to ask these questions. Not going to answer them. Then I will end with a commercial announcement specifically about the book, and others may have announcements as well that they want to offer,
Yes.
because again, that is the beauty of live performances. We're in a space together and actually able to make stuff together. And that's actually kind of what I want to talk about, which is when we're talking about public life, right? When we're talking about life that's not like in the home and between friends and spouses and children, but like when we're among other people in the world, there are two modes that we can fundamentally act in. There's the mode of co-creation, where we're making stuff together, and there's the mode of consumption, where somebody makes something and we take it in, usually buy it, but we're not involved in the making of it. And there is a healthy role, I would argue, for both of those modes of being in public life, co-creation and consumption. But what has happened under capitalism, and this is back to Robert Putnam and this stuff, and connected to the debate that started to be brewing here, is that there are a certain number of people, groups, entities, etc., that recognized that great profits were to be made by getting rid of people's opportunities to co-create and replacing them by consumption, so that co-creation becomes less and less of an option, and we are basically reduced to our lives as consumers. So for instance, when you are sitting around telling stories at a campfire, nobody is making a profit based on that. When you're watching TV, lots of people are making profits on it, right? People will call television the electronic campfire. Right? But the difference is who is making and who is taking, who is creating, who is not. It's not that there is not consumption around a campfire. Right? One person is telling a story and other people are listening to it. But then there's the chance for somebody else to add their own story, right? Then there is a chance for those roles to be mixed and for something to be created together in an ensemble, in a community. And the reduction of opportunities to be a co-creator in public life has deep, deep consequences, right? We can talk about it in terms of all of the alienation, the loneliness that our people are feeling, right? I honestly have trouble imagining, growing up in, white America, I have trouble imagining a world in which you don't feel loneliness, right? But that speaks to what an economist colleague of ours calls bounded imagination, right? Where we can't imagine a tomorrow that's different from yesterday in a lot of key ways, right? My life is a coal miner. That's all I can do. That's what my father did, my grandfather, my uncles, blah, 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 blah. And if the coal industry shuts down, I have no other option than to starve. So I might think that Donald Trump is a racist, sexist, misogynist, liar, asshole. but he's going to do everything to help the coal industry stay in business. And Hillary Clinton said, I'm not saying this is my perspective. I'm saying, but these are stories. Please.
This person's story is a lie.
Mhm.
So they get to be excused from believing lies.
No.
Because they're poor.
Absolutely not.
But no, but the thing is we're witnessing this.
Please, please.
It's an ongoing witness. Every day, I feel as a genetic dissenter
Mhm.
that I am witnessing America that elevates that lie.
Right.
And says it's the greatest thing possible. So every day I walk in this body, I walk in this experience, and I see this world, whether it's neoliberalism
Mhm.
or corporations,
Mhm.
constantly sitting back and saying, if you don't affirm this bullshit about white supremacy, then you're wrong. So that I cannot, and I will say this in love and democracy,
Mhm.
I cannot be tethered to this bullshit.
Sure.
So that's what I am.
So,
And I understand
please.
exactly what you're saying.
And I understand
we're
exactly
all
what you're
here
saying.
about the story and about the transference of we can't all be consumers. We have to be co-creators. But when my experience of witnessing the truth is dismissed and diminished, that's where I was just like, where are we going to go from here? How can we continue being tethered to each other when everybody's telling me, if you don't give in to my sadism,
Right.
you deserve to die?
And when those are the only two choices, then
They're not.
but they're not.
But they're not.
And that is exactly the point of co-creation, is they're not. Donald Trump says, I am your voice. The only person that's going to buy that bullshit is somebody who feels there's no other choice. When people have the chance to speak for themselves, and it's not hypothetical, right? Some of the same people that I'm talking about who tell these stories, Roadside has worked with them. I have worked with them as part of Roadside, working alongside, for instance, black folks in the inner city of West Baltimore, telling their stories together, recognizing their commonalities, recognizing that they can have a voice in different ways, they can build a different kind of future. They look at Donald Trump and other racists and opportunists in a different way. That's where we are. And there are a lot of people that will make a whole lot of profit from making sure that connection doesn't happen, right? The thing about dunking, Jesus Christ, dunking the crucifix in piss, that was a story. So if people are not familiar with the culture wars, the late 80s and early 90s, these were stories that were held up by people that were looking to take down public funding for the arts,
Right.
that were looking to divide communities on these lines and saying, look at what they're supporting. How are you going to fund that? These stories were not put forward by people that wanted public funding for the arts. They were put forward by people that didn't want public funding for the arts because they recognized what was possible there, what had been possible there, which is work that had started working grassroots to grassroots in white, black, Latino, Jewish, Asian, Native American populations across the country that had started and was growing. And with the cuts that came in the Clinton administration as a direct result of those culture wars, they got cut off and they are no more. Last thing I'm going to say, and then I will hush, is this question about government power and corporate power, right? I think we can both agree these are both dangerous things, and they are not the same. The tradition of populism, real true populism, not the bullshit that Trump proffers, the kind of populism that made Martin Luther King say, populist is the only political identity I will take on to myself, understands we work toward unfulfilled ideals.
Yes.
So the notion of government of, by, and for the people is an unfulfilled ideal. It has never been fulfilled, right? This is Langston Hughes. America was never America to me, but America will be. Just because we have not fulfilled that ideal yet doesn't mean we abandon it. And I think that is, a lot of people have asked me, with more or less snark, art in a democracy? We've never had a democracy. Well, of course we've never had a democracy. But we're never gonna have a democracy if we abandon it as an unfulfilled ideal toward which we are working with as broad, as diverse, as big, as strong a base of allies as we can. And we are never going to do that if we do not come at it from a position of co-creation. Were you going to add?
I'm ready to defend the NEA when it's time.
I think we're just after 8, so Adam and then Arnaldo's going to defend the NEA, and I think we may be out of time.
Since we're talking about the NEA, I just think it's worth reiterating to anybody who may not be familiar. The NEA is a direct result of the WPA. WPA being an American collective idea that art was jobs. Art was a living. Art was a way to pull everyone economically as well as spiritually out of the Depression. And it is no coincidence that the people who looked at all of the government spending that came out of the Great Depression and built the highways and built the Great Society and built the things, it's no coincidence that the people who were threatened by that made sure to cut the WPA and the NEA. It's no coincidence. And it's also a sad, ironic fact that the biggest person who's the champion of cutting all those is a mediocre actor.
And that a lot of his backers were neo-Confederates. So that this is the direct legacy of the Confederacy.
So it's not by accident that we're taught to believe certain things about who we are and what we're supposed to be. And it's not an accident that we're told that these things are not possible, or that if they are possible, they're un-American. It's not a coincidence.
And that parts of the NEA that we have lost entirely, like the expansion art program and the folk art program, were direct results of the civil rights movement. They were rights that were won at that time, and then were taken away.
Right. And for those of us, when we don't know that history, we just assume that that's not ever possible. Right? Just as we can't imagine a society where loneliness isn't a thing that we're feeling so constantly.
And
The dead are not sick.
Even the
Vietnamese students will.
the people have not given up the promise of the NEA. And to this day, the NEA, more modest in its pretensions and in its gifts, still manages to fund more work by artists who don't have access to other seed funding. So that's a tremendous gain that we have. And fighting for the NEA is part of the wayfinding that I do. You know,
So I think we should say thank you to our wonderful.
Thank you.
And to say that this is obviously not the end of a conversation. This is a midpoint, and I'll come find you immediately afterwards. I want to hear what you got to say. To say that this is the conversation that is happening in these 2 volumes. It's a whole lot of different voices. One thing that is true of ensemble-produced plays is it's not one playwright. There are lots of people from lots of cultures and backgrounds that have made these plays, and the essays in them are from everybody from Arnaldo and me to Alex S. Jones, who was the first host of NPR's On the Media, to A.B. Spellman, who is a civil rights veteran, jazz musician, and poet, who ran the NEA's expansion arts program, the most radical in terms of supporting folk traditions, supporting rural cultures, supporting artists of color, and community-based working class artists. These are all voices that are in the book. It is not a coherent story with a clear ending. This is where we've gotten so far. These are the stories that have been suppressed by these same actors that want to keep us divided and conquered, that want to keep us as consumers as opposed to co-creators. Here is a legacy we can stand on, not because it is complete or perfect, but because it got us someplace and we can take it from there. And it ends with my piece, which is the end of it, which is an invitation, right? The point is, continue this story. At the end of so many of our plays, it says, all right, we've gotten this far. There's enough of you out there who can continue the story. And we really, really mean that. So please be in touch with each other, share contact info here. Jeremy's got all of my info, and Arnaldo's. Like, we really, really, truly, we need all the allies we can get in building this massive thing that we are looking to build together, and just really appreciate all of your time on a beautiful Monday night here with us, and hope you have a wonderful evening and a wonderful rest of the semester for those that are finishing the semester, and really thank you all so much for being here with us.
Thank you.